Okay.
Alrighty, we got it.
We ready?
You got the student in front of you too.
Yeah, because I gotta get the bowls, so yeah.
I'm gonna pick those up.
You don't get a copy? If the camera's gonna be that way, that's the way it needs to be.
Oh, you actually taking a picture of the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's like the,
I thought it was just being tape recorded.
but this way
But it's
that
not gonna be much of it, it's not gonna be a big deal.
anyone can see it.
There you go.
Okay,
Those
it should
students
work.
will make it today.
Okay, ready?
It's running.
Well, let me tell you how this started. Pastor Miho was getting together the syllabus for the confirmands, and since she knew I was involved in education, she asked me to look over the syllabus, and I did. And then she said, "Do you have any hobbies?" And I said, "Well, I play a little bit of golf." She says, "Well, why don't you take the confirmands out on the golf course with you?" I said, "Well, I don't think I can do much good on the golf course, but I'll be happy to talk about mathematics in the Bible." And I don't think she thought that was a great idea, but she agreed to it.
I'm not
So anyway, that's how we got where we are. I started looking at this thing, I got into it and said, rather than math in the Bible, science in the Bible would be a really good topic. But I was a math major and I squeaked by with C's in science, so I figured I'd better stick where I was at. I'll put up this little chart, that would get it for me because I can't write. But this tells us what Martin Luther said about it. Martin Luther said that in interpreting what a Bible passage means, we need to consider who wrote it, the author. You need to consider who the audience was. You need to consider the purpose of the text. So that many of the things we see in the Bible seem to conflict maybe we can't take everything literally, but Martin Luther says if you'll consider these things, then they all fit into place and make sense. So I'm going to give a few examples today and try to relate them all back to Martin Luther's approach to interpreting different texts in the Bible. All right, Frank, you ready to help me a little bit?
Yep. Which I need to do.
I've got a bowl here, and I've got a string off of a weed eater that is straight across the bowl, same length as the diameter of the bowl, okay? I want to see how many times that diameter will go around this outside of the bowl, so put it right there. Right, there's 1, 2, 3.
Did I mess it up? Yeah,
No.
I did. No, I didn't.
3 doesn't quite get there. Does everybody see that's how much is left over? Oh, a little over 3 times. Let's try a medium-sized bowl and see what happens.
How many cubits is that?
We'll get the cubits in a minute. 1, 2, 3. Did it make it?
Nope.
Not
Still
quite.
got down a little bit.
A little bit more. A little bit more than 3 times. Let's try a little one.
Oh.
One time. 2 times. 3 times.
And a little bit.
And a little bit. Well, I guess that's pretty good. That's it for right now.
That's it.
We're gonna play with that. I'm just gonna scribble this up here a minute. We'll get back to it. Frank says that the circumference was equal to a little more than 3, I put 3 plus, a little more than 3 times what the diameter is. Okay? On all three, it didn't matter what size the bowl was, did it? Doesn't matter what size the circle is, as long as we use the right diameter. Okay, now I want to read, one of our lessons today was from 1 Kings. So I'm going to also use 1 Kings here, chapter 7. It was, in our lesson, of course, it was about the wisdom of Solomon asking for wisdom, and over in chapter 7, they talk about the building of Solomon's temple. Chapter 7, verse 23. Then he made the molten sea. It was round, 10 cubits from brim to brim, 5 cubits high. A line of 30 cubits would encircle it completely. Well, a few things about that. Everybody's in here. Is everybody, not Pastor Miho, not Terry, everybody else remember when the Beverly Hillbillies first came
Yeah.
We're watching the reruns.
I got a picture of Ellie.
Well, you remember, well, I was in the 6th grade. I mean, that is all anybody would talk about at school. It came on Wednesday night, Thursday morning, the teachers and everybody just blown away by it. And the hillbillies moved into the mansion, went out back, and saw the swimming pool. Remember what they called it? Cement pond. Well, that's all we could talk about the next day, the cement pond. And here you pick it up to where they're talking about the bath in King Solomon's temple. Then he made the molten sea. Same thing. Instead of a cement pond, it's a molten sea. It's a body of water encased by a rock. Okay? Exact same thing, a molten sea. And it describes how big that molten sea or that bath was. 10 cubits across, 30 cubits around. Now a cubit was a measure from your elbow to the tip of your finger, about 18 inches. Depending on who measured, they wouldn't all be the same measurement. I looked up, I knew it was a pretty scientific definition. I looked up what we use as a definition now of a meter. A meter is the distance that light travels in a vacuum in just under 1/trillionth of a second. They had the actual fraction if you look at the definition. But 1/trillionth of a second is how far light will travel 1 meter. That's the definition, and that's exact. That's by definition, that's what it is.
But is that how they came up with the meter?
Well, I know. What they did is they took a meter, they took what they were using as a meter, they found out how long it took light to travel that far, and they defined it. Okay.
So they backed it up, they had the measurement, and
They had a meter,
they backed it up.
Nobody's meter stick is the same length. They defined it to be a meter, and we have meters stored in our weights and measures department. And
there's 2 countries in the world.
yeah.
Those that use the metric system and those that have been to the moon.
Well, the United States, and I think one of the very tiny countries still uses the English system. Everybody else uses the metric system, don't they? So that's cubits, that's Beverly Hillbillies. The third thing in this little verse is how big was the circumference of the bath? It was 10 cubits across, 30 cubits around.
Can you show us?
Good formula is.
Yeah. This is what they said. This is what they said. This is the picture of the bath. It said it was 10 cubit diameter and a 30 cubit circumference. Exactly 3 times as much. Frank showed us the circumference isn't 3 times as much as the diameter. Does that bother anybody?
But the formula, the original formula, C equals pi d.
Yeah,
That's, that's why you get that little extra
yeah.
when you go over.
Well, King says it's 3 times as much. Oh,
They weren't very accurate.
why did they say that? Well, because they didn't know. Archimedes used geometry to tell us the 3.14, and that came along about 300 years after First Kings was written, okay? Archimedes showed geometrically that this 3.14 times the diameter was a pretty good estimate. And, you know, 3.14 isn't exact either, is it? I know what the 3.14159, I happen to know 5 decimal approximation.
Infinite.
I don't know why I know that.
Tricky.
We've got a computer that calculated the decimals out to over 1 trillion decimal places. Okay, and it never ends.
And it never.
Never ends. Never will end. Yeah.
No, maybe they did know that it wasn't exact and.
They didn't know it wasn't exact. They didn't know a good approximation, but they would have done this same type of thing and said, oh, it's a little over 3. 3 is a good estimate for our use. It's good enough for us.
Round it out.
Round it out to 3. So in the 1700s, Frank, mathematicians discovered that decimal never ends. We're gonna call it irrational, aren't we? And they also gave it pi. They also gave it a name since it couldn't be written out as a decimal. They just used the Greek symbol pi times the diameter. Now, there are some people that would be troubled with the fact that the Bible said it was 3 times as much. Lutherans are not troubled by that. If they think at all about it, they just say, well, that was the approximation they used back then, which it was. Okay? So if we want to try to resolve the fact that the writer didn't know what pi was 2,000 years before it was invented, we look this way. Who was the author? Traditionally it's been Jeremiah, but theologians now, they don't know who wrote it. Could have been Ezra, could have been some of the scribes of King Josiah. I read. I didn't know that till I read it, by the way. But what's the purpose of it? Well, what is the purpose of Kings and Joshua and Judges and on and on? One thing is, naturally, we just like history. The theological, this is what the Lutheran Study Bible says. The theological reason for it is to show how the actions of the judges, the prophets, the kings, and the people of the time led to the eventual destruction of Judah by the Babylonians and formed a foundation for Israel's return to Judah eventually. So that's, and what you think about that, hey, it's telling us how they got into shape, that they were destroyed. Then the fact they used an approximation for pi doesn't make a bit of difference, does it? We don't care. Let's see. So that's the first thing. Lutherans would say, look, the Bible isn't a math book. It's not a science book. It's a sacred book. So we're not going to get tied down in some of these other questions about that. Okay. The second thing we were looking at in the title was magic numbers and large numbers. And You know, we kind of threw this out as we were talking. I should have thought a little more about it. It's not anything magic about the number. It's symbolic numbers. That's the point. The ancients didn't just see numbers as counting. They saw special meanings in the different numbers. And one I'll talk about here is the number 7. Because 7 is used over 500 times in the Bible. And the first time, of course, is in the creation story. I don't know, maybe I'll stick this up. This is what we think now about our creation. The earth, our earth, not the whole world, just the earth that we live on, is about 4.5 billion years old. And Homo sapiens, the people that live on it, have been here about 200,000 years. Just a short period of time. We haven't been on the earth very long as far as how old the earth is. So we look at this and say, how do you justify that when Genesis says we were here the 6th day? The earth was created the first day, and then the 6th day here we were. Well, it doesn't look like we were here all on the first week. It took us longer than that to get here. Does that bother anybody? No, all good Lutherans in here. Well, it bothers some people, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, some people.
I mean, when somebody, like God, he is here forever. I think man put that 24 hours making one day. If you're here forever, his first day could have been a long one.
That's one way. That's one way of looking at it, is redefine day. I mean, people try to do it all kinds of ways. Okay. But let's kind of think about what Lutherans say. Who's the author of it? Typically, these has been called the books of Moses. I think theologians now think it came along sometime after Moses' time. Who's the audience? Well, it was Israelites initially, and now all of us. And what's the purpose of telling that Genesis story, the creation story? And there might be a lot of them. I'll tell you 2 I thought of. First of all, this creation story, very similar to creation stories in other cultures and in other religions. Not a whole lot of difference in them, but there's 2 things I thought of that's different about our creation story. Number 1, it takes place in 7 days. 7 means to those people 2 things. It means completion, and it means perfection. And so someone that's writing this is going to think, well, the whole world is completed and perfected. It wouldn't be an unnatural thing for them to do to set it aside in 7 sections like that. Another thing I thought of that's different about our creation story from others, and this is the big one. It says, in the beginning, God created. Not a God of the sky, not a God of the earth, not a God of the water. Not like these other creation stories that have lots of gods that do different things. The Christian creation story says God is one. So that was from the beginning that when the Bible was written, we understood there to be one God. So maybe you can think of other things. Why would someone write this creation story this way and put it in the Bible? But I think that's the big thing, is that our differences is one God, and 2, it's just their reliance on the use of number 7 as being a completion and a perfection of it. If you look through this Bible, this number 7, like I said, it occurs over 500 times. It occurs more than 50 times in Revelation itself. You think of all the 7 different things that occurred. And so, Revelation's awfully hard. so much of it is symbolic, not just the numbers, but everything else. It's hard to interpret. I don't remember the context, Pastor Miho, but at one time might remember I sent you a text and said, Martin Luther didn't even want Revelation to be in the Bible, did he? I don't think he did. She very diplomatically responded, well, it wasn't his favorite book.
He had another back
There you go. Here's another use of 7. And if 7 is used twice, it's for emphasis. Well, remember Peter asked Jesus how many times we should forgive our brothers and sisters who sin against us. And at the time, the rabbis at the time were preaching 3. You need to forgive people 3 times before you give up on them. Okay? So I think Peter thought he was on to something. He said, Jesus, shouldn't we do it 7 times? That's complete, that's perfect. Isn't 7 times the amount? And what did Jesus tell him?
7 times.
70 times 7, okay? And so the little large number piece is, that's like saying I got 1,000 things to do this afternoon, isn't it? You don't take that number literally. You don't take 490 literally. It means what? On and on and on. On and on. By the way, when I looked that verse up in the Lutheran Study Bible, it doesn't say 70 times 7. It says 77. It says we're supposed to forgive our brothers and sisters 77 times. I said, well, am I remembering that thing wrong? And I went and looked at the King James Version, and it's 70 times 7 in the King James Version. In here it says 77, and it's got a little footnote that says, or 70 times 7. So yeah, just that's all. That's all it is. It's just a big number saying keep on forgiving them. And we're not concerned about it at all, are we?
Keep going.
Keeps going.
Thank goodness Becky is.
Okay. Now this next one.
Well, 7s are supposed to be good in Las Vegas.
Oh, that is the point. That is a point. You better not go looking for magic numbers in the Bible. And that are one of the reasons why I keep getting people saying the world's going to end on such and such a day. They think they found something symbolic in these numbers and magic about them.
But it tells you in Matthew that even the angels in heaven haven't been given that date.
That's
So
right.
how can a mere mortal know when the date is?
Well, wasn't there a big debate at one point in time in Roman Catholic Church about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin?
Oh my God.
Yeah, probably, and also, when you get into that Revelation, I started talking about 7 and 12, because 12 is an interesting number too, and that they really get into that if you think about how many people have been sealed and saved and all like that in Revelation with 12s. But I said, no, I don't get into that.
Well, when you get through with this study, you can do us a study on Revelation.
No, that's the real number. That's like me taking them out to the golf course. I'd do that.
It's funny whenever they do the lotto numbers and they're going to show them on the screen when they pick. I always try to guess some numbers to see if I was right, and I deliberately do not pick 7 because first number comes to my mind is 7.
Yeah.
And then I have to say it's not going to be a 7. I'll make 6.
Yeah. Well,
I'm never right.
We'd have to buy a ticket too.
All right, here's the next thing, and the last thing. I'm going to hold this book, Lutheran Study Bible, which it says 77 is, the Lutheran Study Bible is the New Revised Standard Version. It's what this is written in. And I want to hold it up and I want to drop it and try to figure out how long it's going to take to hit the floor. Okay? Not really. I mean, it's a thought experiment. I'm going to pretend to drop it. And so when I start, I'm going to hold it 8 feet above the ground. Hadn't taken any time yet because I hadn't dropped it. And my little idea of seeing how long it's gonna be is I'm gonna let it drop halfway down to 4 feet. I'm gonna take a little stopwatch and measure it and see how long it takes to get the first 4 feet down, get halfway there. So it'll be down to 4 feet, and I don't have my stopwatch with me, so I'm just gonna call it time 1. However long it took, I'll call it time 1, okay? And then I'll say, okay, it's halfway there. Now before it can hit the floor, it has to go halfway again, doesn't it? And it'll be 2 feet above the floor. And that'll be another period of time between here and here to get from 4 to 2.
How would you go from 4 to 0?
Well, it can't hit the floor yet until it gets halfway there. It'll be 1 foot above the floor. And that'll take time 3. So far I could add up time 1 and time 2 and time 3 and see how long it's taken so far. Everybody with me?
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna get halfway there. It's gonna have to get down to 6 inches, isn't it? And that took some time. Then it's gotta get down to 3 inches.
Oh my goodness. That's a long travel.
And that took some time.
Shall I set the recording to slow-mo?
So
Is it ever going to get,
That's
it's
the-
never
it-
going to drop?
It can't ever reach the floor. Because it's always gotta go halfway first. And I could be up here until next Sunday. I'm 1,000.
I gotta do dogs before then.
All right, so we know it hits the floor. But what's wrong with doing this? What's wrong with saying that's the time it takes halfway, and the time it takes another half, and the time it takes another half, and the time it takes another half? What's wrong with it? Not that we'd ever want to do it this way, but can you see anything wrong with the math of it?
So in point.
Yeah, the thing that's wrong with I mean, this looks great. The thing that's wrong with it is that the number of times I'm doing this approaches infinity, and numbers act differently at infinity. Okay? As you get around infinity, it doesn't, the finite math that we're used to doesn't hold up anymore. To really solve these types of problems, which is the sum of an infinite number, you need to go to Saucahawk and sign up for a calculus class if you really want to do it that way.
You're teaching that class?
Okay. But except now, mathematicians know how to sum an infinite series, but beyond that, we don't know anything about infinity. I mean, it just blows your mind, kind of, doesn't it? You just have no way of thinking about it. So when we ask, now what I wanted to talk about here is, what happens when people read the Bible and they just don't understand it. Why? Part of it is, it might not be cultural. The cultural things in the Bible might not be, we're not used to them anymore. That's part of it. But part of it is if we've got an infinite God that behaves in those ways, we're just not going to get there. Okay? So they're the unknown things that we need to study the Bible about. They're the unknowing things, the thing we can never know that we don't need to worry too much about. Because we don't get there on this earth. Yes, sir.
Martin Luther had some of his students walking around in compound, and one of the students said, Professor Luther, Martin Luther, what was God doing before he created the earth? So Martin Luther picked up a stick and said he was looking for a stick to beat people who asked such weird questions.
Well,
So no need to ask foolish questions.
well, we kind of know what he did before he created the earth, because there's a lot of universe out there got created, but we did, but eventually, yeah.
I went to one service, a friend had passed away, and the preacher said, a lot of people say in the Bible that we're not supposed to ask why. but he said, Jesus asked why when he was on the cross.
Yeah, sure.
And so, it's okay if we ask why. We might not get the answer until we get upstairs,
Yeah.
but it's okay to ask why on things.
Well, yeah, I think that's the way we look at it. I frankly have been gratified that at least twice since Pastor Miho has been here, she said in her sermon, I don't really understand this text too well. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Martin Luther did the same thing. He said, I just don't understand it all. This was the best plan he had for trying to get to an understanding, but some things we just never do.
Well, I think it's fun to contemplate the infinite, and like Gertrude, I'm always asking why.
Yeah.
But Doug and I, when we talk about it, I just, my mind is blown, and I'm just mesmerized by it, and Doug's just,
Well,
yeah.
there's a difference between unknown and unknowable. If it's unknown, you try to have an answer. If it's unknowable, you just go about your business. Don't lose any sleep over it.
Well, does anybody else find Paul pretty wordy?
Yeah.
Especially Romans.
Yeah.
Find what?
Find Paul wordy.
Oh.
I can't understand half of what he's saying. It's not logical. I'll put it that way.
He needs more commas.
But there is
Or sometimes a period.
but he didn't use it in the Romans.
This is what Martin Luther said about these things, though, that we don't know and can't figure out. How about this? The Bible tells us what God wants us to know. That's what it tells. It tells us what He wants us to know.
And it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
But, did Solomon pray for wisdom?
You should too. It's slow coming to me, but.
God's not finished with
He's
you.
not
You're a work in progress.
All right. But by the way, I don't know how many of you use this. It's just wonderful. This Lutheran Study Bible. And I just suggest that you, if you don't have it, get it and read about Martin Luther and the way he looked at things and so forth. I've got three things that he said that I just kind of snatched these lines out of the middle of other things. So Luther paid close attention to a number of factors, including the historical context and the literary style. So he didn't view the historical books and books of poetry the same way that he viewed the Gospels. Okay, he didn't lose any sleep over these inadequacies or not inadequacy in contradictory things that happened in the history. There are many passages in the Holy Scriptures that are contradictory according to the letters. But when that which motivates them is pointed out, everything is all right. What made that person write this? What were they trying to get across? What did they want you to know? And then finally, when discussing Paul's letters, Luther says, I do not expend any labor or concern on harmonizing all these things, but pay attention to Paul's purpose and intention. What was his purpose of writing? What did he want to get across?
Didn't he say that some of the Romans and some of those should have been part of the gospel, included in the gospel?
Some of the what?
Some of the
Epistles.
epistles should have been part of the gospel.
No, I don't know that.
I read that somewhere, I'm gonna have to find it.
Martin Luther said at some point that Romans was the clearest depiction of God's grace compared to any other book in the Bible.
Yeah, I think so. He loved Romans, didn't
Yeah.
Maybe it was just that book, but that's what it was on. Ephesians and a couple other.
Well, I'll just say this, there are some people, I've said some things today that I don't think anybody in here was offended by, but there would be people who would argue with me outside of here about not taking everything literally. And when you meet those people, you just have to, okay, this is your opinion, and I got a different one, don't lose a friend over it.
Yep.
Say don't talk politics and religion with people. But I will say this, I do feel like we're kind of blessed to have had, the tradition of Martin Luther as far as interpreting the Bible. It just makes so much sense to me. So, such a good way to interpret what we're reading. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Some went beyond my head,
What
but
you
that
said
was.
about 70,000